today about how to prepare for your next funding round. Yasmin gave my bio. So as she mentioned, head of partnerships at Carta, joined about 3 years ago now. And outside of Carta, I'm an active early stage investor and really love talking about these topics. For those that aren't familiar with Carta, Carta is a holistic equity management platform for founders. So we make cap table tools available to founders for free. That's called Carta Launch. There's a link at the end where Startup Grind participants can get on that today. We do 409A valuations. We issue safes and help you do your safe financing, completely automated end to end. You can model dilution. You can plan your equity and your cash compensation. And today, Carta serves about 21,000 companies across the venture ecosystem. We have over 1.6 million holders represented on the platform. We have over $1 trillion in equity tracked on the platform. So really excited to dive in. Before we get into the fun stuff, I am required to read a word from our lawyers. So this communication is on behalf of eShares Inc., doing business as Carta Inc. This communication is not to be construed as legal, financial, or tax advice, and is for informational purposes only. This communication is not intended as a recommendation, offer, or solicitation for the purchase or sale of any security. Although this presentation may provide information concerning potential legal issues, it is not a substitute for legal advice, and any opinions or conclusions provided in this presentation shall not be ascribed to Carta. Carta does not assume liability for reliance on the information provided herein. So with that, let's get into it. So today we're going to talk about steps before a fundraise and how you plan for your fundraise. Carta has a ton of resources about aspects 2 and 3 on this slide. So if you want to get into even more mechanics on raising the round, on understanding term sheets, we have a founder resource center on our website that's linked in the back of the deck here. We have a ton of resources on our blog, and then we have numerous videos, podcasts, etc., to work for founders. Today, we're going to talk about getting ready for the fundraise, determining your round mechanics, selecting investors and thinking through that process, thinking through how to time the raise and how to manage it, and then handling any admin work associated with the raise. So what we'll cover today is planning that attack, timing, and admin work. And on planning the attack, we'll get into how much should I raise and scoping that side out. How much equity do I want to give away, and what's fair in that regard, and then what type of equity do I want to actually issue in this round. So moving on, how much should you raise? In this sense, I think the most important thing for founders is, it's easy to look around and say, well, this company in my space has raised X and this company has raised Y, and I'm not sure exactly how much I should raise based on what they're raising. And I think to really ground yourself for discussions with investors, always recommend having a bottoms-up plan. What are your milestones that you want to reach? I think as step one, understand what you want to raise for your company and your milestones. That's going to ground your story and what you want to do. And we can help you at Carta in terms of if you have a bunch of hires to bring on with our total comp product, you can look at how much might these people cost you. You can get a sense of your runway. But I think it's most important to ground initially in just what does the company need to do to get to the next step, and thinking about it in kind of an 18 to 24 month timeline for a typical raise. What's going to fund you for 18 to 24 months with a little buffer so you can get done what you need to get done. Then you want to look around at the market, and after you decide, what do you think it's going to take for you to get your company to the next milestone, what's the typical size of the round you're raising? There's a lot of resources out there that are available in terms of looking at your specific space, looking at market data for your space. One thing we've made available for founders on our platform is live market data, where you can go in and actually see, for the last 90 days, what state of the market for pre-seed, seed, and Series A rounds. And you can see from our data, just the last 90 days, pre-seed, it looks like the average round is raising about 750K. Seed rounds are clocking in generally around 2.4 million, and Series A is really getting up there now to about 10 million. And then in terms of dilution, you want to think about, as a founder, it's great to bring in, a lot of cash so that you're well capitalized for your milestones. But in this market where a lot of cash is looking for a home, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later on, be cognizant of, you're going to be able to raise, assuming your company executes, you're going to be able to raise on better and better terms over time. So you may not want to actually overraise today. You may want to raise what it takes just to hit your milestones. And then don't let investors actually overcapitalize you, which is something a lot of companies are dealing with today. Because you can probably raise on different terms over time. And there may be other solutions like debt or like PIPE or other solutions that help you actually minimize your dilution as you grow. So in determining what your company's worth, this is also something you're going to want to try to take stock of before you go in. There's a bit of an art and a science to where you land in terms of valuation. The science has to do with just what's the state of the market around your space? What's the value of the problem you're solving? Which investors tend to care about it? What stage are you in? How much traction do you have? These are things investors are going to look at. What have market comps looked like? So if there's other companies, in a similar stage, what sort of valuations are they getting? And then, the quality of your team. How much does your team, the founders on your team, match the market you're going after? And then the art of it is really how you handle interactions with investors. Like, I would not recommend anchoring yourself on price. Let them strike first and get an idea, ideally through multiple investors, as you drive this process of, what they think your company's worth. Driving competition between investors is great, and we'll get into timing the round in a bit. And I think that's really key for how you do this. And then remembering that it's a two-way conversation. Valuation is one thing, but I think it's really important for founders in the early stage to understand, it can feel really, really good to get a really high valuation for your company. The valuations are also kind of like gravity. At some point, that's going to catch up to you. And so, if companies are raising way ahead of where they are operationally, it adds a ton of pressure to the team. It adds a ton of pressure to the founders. And so sometimes the best answer is to, choose an investor who's ideal for your company, who's going to be a great long-term advisor for you. And maybe not a lot of a lot of founders are choosing not to take the best absolute valuation they can get. Maybe they take the second or third best valuation they can get, but they're picking the best investor who's going to be the right long-term partner. And I also think in these conversations, a mindset I see work really well is that, look, there's so much cash out there today looking for a home. There's, investors are flush with cash. There's new funds forming literally every day, and they're all looking for deployment. And so cash is really the commodity in this market, and you and stock in your company is not a commodity. So I think going into that with that mindset, there's a lot of kind of beta trapping that happens in this market where you're made to feel like you need cash, and that's kind of puts you on the bottom side of this relationship. In reality, they all have cash. There's thousands of people with cash, and there's no one with your company. So I think going into it with that confidence and understanding who really holds the commodity and who doesn't is super important. And in terms of how much equity should you give away, we're big fans of modeling at Carta. We provide a lot of tools, even for free, to founders in Carta Launch to make modeling super powerful for you. Make sure you don't have to fiddle around with spreadsheets repeatedly, and you can just in about a minute model out what your round can look like. So one thing we are seeing is that over the last few years, the proportional percentage of equity that's being given away by round is falling. And so founders are actually, and I think this is a function of valuations, like founders are raising more and more, but valuations are running away at a little faster rate. And as a result, companies are able to scale without selling as much of the company, and kind of taking advantage of that investor competition to put money into the company at higher valuations. So let's talk about which type of equity you might want to issue. In the early stages, there's essentially three major types of equity you might issue. And the first two are close cousins of each other, convertible notes and safes. Convertible notes and safes are lumped together and often just called convertibles, or maybe loosely referred to as notes. I'd say convertible note is kind of the historic version of the instrument. And what this is it's an instrument that you issue that's effectively going to be priced and turned into equity at a later date. And so founders like to do this because they can issue on a rolling basis. They don't have to haggle too much about defining all the terms of a round. These are usually 3-4 pages long, whereas a whole financing set is probably 100 pages long. And so you can meet investors, you can issue them quickly. As I mentioned, you can issue a safe NN on Carta today in about a minute and run the whole process on our system. So we've made this really automated and easy. The forms are generally pretty agreed upon across the market. And so, what you're doing is you're delaying implementing some of the terms and deciding some of the terms around your company, but you're giving yourself a lot of flexibility to raise early on. And the vast majority of companies start on these on safes or notes. A safe is very similar to a note, works pretty much exactly the same, except properly speaking, a note is a debt instrument and a safe is not. A safe is viewed just as a type of equity, so you're not having kind of a debt instrument in theory over the company where the company can go into default. So a safe is a little more representative of probably the actual business arrangement that's going on. Because if you default on an early stage company, there's really going to be no cash generally to be paid out to creditors anyway. And safes have just become a little more simpler, a little more founder friendly. I'd say there's a lot of questions today around pre-money safe versus post-money safe. In general, pre-money is the market standard. I think it's about 2/3 to 1/3 are using pre-money, though post-money is pretty popular. And post-money tends to be a little more investor favorable because what post-money safes allow investors to do is have a little more of a goal seek function on exactly predicting what they're going to own in that company after the next round. So almost all founders are going to start with these. And I'd say, we make it super easy to model these in advance and see what they might convert into in a hypothetical future round. And that's absolutely worth the time, because what happens to founders all the time is they issue 2-3 million in safes. They don't necessarily model out what it might mean in the given series seed or series A that they're planning for. And then they get into a situation where the night before that round, they're realizing what that model looks like and what all the conversions are going to look like. These are absolutely fantastic instruments, but they can become way more dilutive than founders expect. So I just would say, whether you're talking about pre-money, post-money, valuation caps, discounts, run some quick scenarios on our system and see what that can mean for you. And happy to take questions at the end about more specifics here. And then preferred stock, when you hear about, hey, I raised Series Seed, Series A, Series B, what those are series of preferred stock. And so in a round, if you have notes and safes outstanding that you've already issued to investors, and then you go raise, let's say $5, $10, $20 million in new money, you're going to issue that as preferred stock. And those notes and safes are going to convert on whatever terms you gave those investors into this new round. And that'll become, say, your Series Seed or your Series A round. This does have a firm price. This generally will have you, work with attorneys. You want to have good counsel, and if you need good counsel, we can help you find it. At Carta, you can just email us at partners@carta.com, and we can give you great recommendations. And with this, you are going to work through and define, those 100 pages of documents. Who's on the board? Who has special rights? Who has special protections? What can the company do or not do without board or investor approval? So, notes and safes, generally quick, pretty inexpensive. Preferred stock rounds can you bring in more money, but it's kind of everyone at once typically, and tends to be a lot more expensive in terms of legal fees. And just to show this from our system, this is kind of trends of convertible notes and safes over the last 6. And as you can see, safes have clearly passed notes in terms of the preferred instrument across the market in kind of a 60% to 40% ratio. But my observation, especially on the coast, is that safes are certainly running away with the trend in terms of the way, at least the choice between those two is going. And on Carta, if you're on launch and you look at market data on launch, we actually show also the mix of, in the early stages, what's the mix of price rounds to these convertibles as well. And then in terms of timing the raise, we'll talk through investor selection, fundraising windows, and then some founders think you should always be raising. Some founders think you should time your raise. We'll give observations on what we see working as of late. So in terms of investor selection, there's a lot of ways to go on. You can look at systems like PitchBook or Crunchbase, other systems. You can see, what are investors in my space, who's active in competitors, And I think the most important thing for founders that I work with is start a sheet, or some founders use Notion, some use Google Sheets. It really doesn't matter exactly what tool you use. Just use what works for you. But build a sheet and an outreach plan of who are the firms you think are your tier 1 firms for this raise, where they seem to be interested in your space. It seems like they are not investing in competitors. Who's aligned on values. And I would say understand the firms, understand what kind of checks they're writing and what kind of rounds they're investing in. Even the partner at the firm that you think is most on goal for you, that you want to get to. And what sort of brand you think you can leverage. If you get that VC on your cap table, can you leverage them to additional rounds and introductions and potential go-to-market help down the road? So that's probably the most important advice I can give for investor selection. And I'd say we have a podcast we put out recently called about planning your fundraise. And a founder I know, Philippe Victor from Maddie, he gave just an absolute masterclass in how he went about this exact process, how he went about all the warm intros. And it's a phenomenal, really interesting listen, and I highly recommend it. I linked that in the back of the deck as well. And how to think about timeline. I'd say conventional wisdom used to say, like, hey, always be raising, always be talking to investors that you think you might work with in the future. And I think in today's market, with so much cash out there and investors having pretty sharp elbows and being ready to work on a pretty quick timeline, I'd say, I would pretty much throw that out the window in today's market. I would say build your plan, be prepared in terms of decks, materials, diligence, what your story is. And then I would time it and say it's working really, really well for founders that have a really great plan of action, have all their ducks in a row, are ready to go. And then they say, okay, I'm going to have all these prior angels and all these advisors make all these intros. Warm intros by far work best. So know the firms you're trying to get to, and then know how you're trying to navigate the network to get to them. Understand your narrative, and then constrain the timeline and make the timeline work for you. And the real reason for this is that investors, they love having optionality, and if they don't have to make a decision on your company, it only serves them to just sit there and use your time and gather more data, which may not serve you at all. If they're going to say no, it's good to get to a quick no. And if you want a decision, it's good to force a decision quickly. Otherwise, you can just always be expending energy on this, and it may not benefit you. So I think the founders that control the timeline, control the narrative, and say, hey, we're kicking this off. I want to take term sheets in 2 weeks. I'm happy to meet with you. And, and then you kind of let the process work for you. Again, I fully recommend the podcast I mentioned on our website, because it gives great founder stories and how they work through these exact processes and how they understood it and how they got to work for them. And then a couple other tips I'd say is spend time with decision makers. Your time is valuable. A lot of firms have people that will spend time with you that can't really make a decision on your raise. And that tends to, it does, not to say that never leads anywhere, but it's not a very high value use of time. It tends to not mature from there. So I would say if you can optimize for spending time with people that can actually make and drive investment decisions of the firms, generally at the partner or the GP general partner level, you should absolutely do that. And just optimize your time. Oh, and the last thing I'd say from this slide is if you have angels already on the books or prior investors, I am a big fan of sending out updates to that group. I think it's a great way of continually focusing your own mind, showing progress, showing momentum, and then they're usually really excited and eager to help you get your story out there quickly for the round. And then finally, for handling admin work, how do you go into this process and make sure you're completely ready to attack this? You're completely ready for the round. The takeaway here is you don't want admin to hold up the round, and it really can. If you're not on top of your cap table, if you don't understand the model and what it could mean for you, there can be a lot of heartburn around this time. So we really want to enable founders to play offense with this process. So first of all, go into this with a clean cap table. Investors, today rounds move incredibly fast. They're going to want to understand your cap table from a high level. As they give out their term sheet, you're going to want to be completely ready for diligence. And rounds move so fast that you might put yourself in a tough position. At a minimum, you're risking extra expense and poor optics. So I would say, have this ready, avoid unnecessary delays, model your round. It used to be a little more excusable when it was tough to model and you'd have to build kind of crazy Excel spreadsheets to model out what all your notes and safes would feel like. And we definitely hear stories of companies that pay their lawyers $10,000 to do this. And sometimes it's so complicated that that's merited, but we've put a lot of the tools right in your hands and right in your lawyer's hands. And so, if you have 40 safes and you want to see what your Series A might look like, you can do that for free on Carta in just a couple minutes. And so we want to put that in your hands, but understand what it's going to mean for you. And as you're raising notes or safes, proactively model what that round you have in your mind in the future might be, because we want to put you in control of that process. Get ready for a 409A. If you're bringing on employees, making a bunch of offers, we have our total comp product that can help you, and you're going to want to get ready to issue those options as soon as you have closed a new round. And so make sure you have your financials in a row. And we have we do about 12,000 409A valuations for companies at all different stages every year. So if you want to contact our team and understand, what do I need to be ready for this process? Employees like to get their options. If they don't get them before the round, get them right after. And then finally, if you have employees with either some vested options or early exercisability in their options, it can be nice to give them a heads up if they want to kind of optimize their tax exposure on their equity in your company. Before you get a term sheet, while the old fair market value may still be in play, it can be nice to give them a verbal heads up and say, hey, you may want to exercise and take care of this now. So that's just a few thoughts on how to manage your round, how to manage getting ready for it. And we can take Q&A. I think the deck will be circulated later. We've made a bunch of resources available for all of you, how to get onto launch, how to access discounts to Carta through Startup Grind, how to reach our team, and then various materials and podcasts that may be of interest to you. But with that, I'll stop there and we can take some questions from the audience.
All right, so the first question is, for a refugee immigrant diversity founder with a small network, what's the best way to get warm interest to top-tier impact funds?
Yes, actually, so my friend Philippe is from Poland, and who was on that podcast, and he came to the States, and that one reason that podcast is so fun is because when he came here, he didn't have a ton of connections. And I've known a lot of founders from other countries. One I've worked with for years, I met literally the week he got here from Australia. I think the biggest thing you can do is show traction. I'd say advisors can be absolutely fantastic. Like if someone is interested in your space and may want to help you, and you meet them and they believe in you, bring them on as an advisor. It might be a quarter point of equity over 2 or 3 years, but they can be really helpful to you. And advisors are fantastic for helping you understand the market here. Maybe there's someone who's gone before you in your space or a similar space. But people with credibility to kind of bridge that gap, it's kind of a social capital game. And so I'd say the best way is, be really smart and try to continue improving your network as you bring on more angels, as you bring on advisors, and think about strategically, like how is this person going to actually help me access more meetings, more market share, more influential investors. I would attack it that way. And then, as I mentioned, as people do get into your sphere, as you have advisors and you have really investors, I think the founders that do a monthly or maybe quarterly update, it's really great because it continually reminds people, of who you are, what the company's up to, and shows how you're making decisions and how you're making progress over time. And then it helps those around you kind of rally behind you and help tell your story as well.
Thank you. You just mentioned the podcast a few times, and I see in the chat a few people are asking what's the name. We're definitely going to share the slides, but if you could just repeat the name one more time for everyone.
Yes, it's Carta's Raising the Round podcast. And because it's so interesting, people talk about how to prepare for the round and what to do with the cash and the terms of the round, but what we really wanted to dive into was what's the process of that founder psychology and working the investor psychology when you're actually in the midst of it. Like you're about to kick off, or you're kicking off, you're having 50 conversations at the same time and trying to keep track of them. We wanted to talk about and really explore that moment because it's about the most valuable thing we could do, but it's actually pretty unexplored, and so I found it to be a really fascinating piece of content.
I think it's great. So everyone, check out the podcast. We got a few more minutes. Let me see. So there's a question: where can I, or how can I find templates for asking investors for initial seed money? Are there any templates that Carta is providing, or where should founders look for these templates?
In terms of templates for docs, as I mentioned, if you're on launch, we have our own safe docs and we have the YC safe docs on there as well. So, if you have pretty much agreed, like, hey, I think we're gonna do this cap or this discount on a safe, you can issue that right on Carta. We also have sample term sheets, things like that. That's a little more for priced rounds. I'd say for convertibles, it tends to be a little more informal, where you meet, you trade some emails, you kind of agree on a general. That's one reason safes are so easy. If you're kind of agreed on a cap or a discount, you're done. And so there's not a lot of kind of formal term sheets that go back and forth. It tends to be conversational, and then you can just go on our system and issue it out, and then they'll sign and accept on Carta as well.
Awesome, thank you. How much should a startup expect to pay for a 409A? Is there anything you can approximately say, or is it probably a bit tricky to say exact
Sure.
number?
Well, I'm biased. When I was practicing in Big Law about 10 years ago, it was usually 5,000 or more just for every single report. Today we've completely changed that. So now, like, Carta is a SaaS subscription. You and your employees, your investors, you all get a great experience, and then 409A is just part of the subscription, and so there's no additional cost, like as many as you need in a year because you raised a new round or the market changed on you or whatever. We will just issue a new one, and it's just completely within the plan, and so there's no additional cost. For a new company, launch is free, and then if you need a 409A, with the startup grind discount, it starts at around $2,300 a year for the full subscription.
Awesome, thank you.
Yep.
Let's take one more
So I would
question.
not go pay $5,000 or $10,000 for a piece of paper.
I think who was asking for that question? I think it was Phil. So Phil, I hope you know now. You got the answer. One more question I'm seeing here is, let me see. I'm also seeing a rise in crowdfunding being preferred by newer startups. What might be your observation or thoughts in that area compared to the traditional methods of fundraising?
That's a great question. I think it's definitely changing. A few years ago, crowdfunding was, kind of viewed in a negative connotation. It was like companies that can't really raise from traditional investors go that route, and then they might be a little bit lost in the wilderness. I think that's evolved a lot. There's been a number of notable companies that have pursued that, and then in conjunction or soon after, they have raised from very good brand name investors. So I think it's really changed. What I would say, if you're going to go that route, I would pay attention to make sure you're going through the right regulatory steps. And there are groups like Republic that can help with that. I think if you do, like, it's good to go through a known regulatory regime like Reg CF. I don't want to give legal advice on here, but some people have done it in a way that doesn't hold up super well under securities laws. And I would say just go through a good, reputable group to help you. And I still think it can be it can be tough to have, like, founders can find a negative experience to have 50 or 100 angels. With crowdfunding, you might exacerbate that even more. So I'd be mindful about, like, how much time are you investing in updating these people? How much can they really help you? But I think in terms of, is an impediment to get started that way, I don't think so anymore. Just be careful on the legal side.
Thank you. Here's one more interesting question. It's a bit related to timing of a raise. Is there a benefit when you get an investor when you are profitable but actually growing slowly?
There can be. I mean, if you're profitable, look, venture capital isn't for every business, and these instruments aren't for every business. Like, typically the instruments we're talking about are intended for high growth startups, and most investors putting money into those kind of assets, they're expecting you to be on a certain trajectory or hoping to be on a certain trajectory. So it's always good to understand what's the investor looking for. Like, there could be a mismatch in the way you want to build out the business. And sometimes it can be fantastic to have a profitable lifestyle business that you own, 75 or 100% of that business. And, your fate's completely in your hands. If you go the high growth route, you're really putting yourself on the roller coaster for a long time. It might be years. You gotta, really be nose to the grindstone, and eventually you can lose control of the company. Probably at some point on that path, you're going to lose a majority. You're going to have to deal with a board. So, that can be a fantastic benefit and very freeing in some ways. And it's not for every founder. There's definitely founders that have had a great cash flow business and have then gone the high growth route with that business and kind of wish they hadn't. So I would think personally about just what route is best for you, and is that the right option for you? And maybe that investor is the right fit, but it's possible there's a misalignment of expectations.
What about industries that have been affected by COVID, such as tech, travel? Do you think it's harder to get any financial traction in those industries right now?
Amazingly, I was actually an investor in like a tech travel company business travel company that had a successful exit during COVID, like an upside exit during COVID. So that was nice when, bookings went to 5% of normal. I think, look, the world is largely swinging back. It's really clear people want to get on the road again. A lot of kind of weaker companies in those spaces were cleared out. And so I think, if you have a compelling vision in your space, I wouldn't say any space is kind of off limits from a COVID perspective now. Like, so much has changed. There's so much realignment, but I think there's a general optimism about people getting back on the road in that space, for example. And maybe you'll find a thinner group of competitors to work with.
Awesome, thank you. One last question. I think our time is already almost over. So I have here one more question, a very general one. Any guidelines for a pitch deck you are sending to get a meeting? How long should it be? Which things to cover, the order, and do you always finish with the ask?
No, I would not finish with an ask. If you are sending a pitch deck around, I would say the warm rule applies. Like, you want to get a warm intro if possible. And so, I just did this for a company last night. Like, I know the people and I pass the deck to an institutional investor. That's great. Like, rather than slinging it cold, if it comes from someone they know, I think that's a lot more powerful. Short and sweet. And what you're trying to get is a meeting. You're not going to tell, I would say, don't tell a quantitative or hyper logical business end-to-end, like, business plan story. You're trying to, at that point, hook into a psychological buy-in on the narrative and piquing their interest, so you get the meeting. And then if they believe in you, then you get a check. But I think short and sweet, you want to sell them on, like, this is the problem, this is how we want to solve it, this is why we have the team to do it, here's what we want to accomplish, and keep it short and sweet, and just try to pique interest. You want to get the meeting. I would not ask for any specifics in just like a general deck that's going to be slung around. And also, you should assume anything you send in any way is going to be seen by others. So, don't be hyper secretive in your deck, but don't put things in there that you don't want, like every VC and all their friends and their dog and competitors to see as well.
Awesome, thank you. I see, how do we connect with Reed? But Rachel already replied. So everyone, if you want to connect with Reed, please see Rachel's post in the chat. He shared Reed's email address. Thank you so much for being here with us, Reed. Really appreciate all the tips. I'm seeing the great feedback. This was great. Thanks, Reed. So thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. And I hope that everyone had a good time. And if you want to join the next round of workshops, you can go to the agenda and just click on the next workshop starting in about 10 minutes. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.